Hello all. Let us wrap up Unit 3 of APUSH today with Part 3 of 3 of this unit, where the total runtime for all three parts might be an hour and more, so that's my bad. But this is a very important unit in my opinion, and one that there is a lot of information for. And expect longer videos, sadly, for every other unit. Hopefully this is worth it, but let's wrap up today with the Washington presidency and the John Adams presidency. Washington's presidency, just from this caption, has extreme stress on a policy of neutrality, which we will get into right here. Washington's foreign policy, with foreign policy just being how you handle international affairs, Washington often promoted neutrality, which means have no solid concrete relationships with other international superpowers. So take Britain, France, Spain, later on Russia, or Japan, any of them later on, and even now. And this kind of follows in the footsteps of the government of the Articles of Confederation, but less out of the inability to have a international relationship and have that foundation, but rather out of choice, where Washington could establish them, but he recognizes that having these relationships is dangerous for America, a nation that is very new and doesn't have really established politics, and a nation that is united under one political ideology. And Washington's um push for this the policy of neutrality comes with the Citizen Jeanette affair, where during this time period France is having their own internal issues, and the ambassador for France, Edmund Jeanette, comes to America. So Jeanette hopes to have Americans come to his side and go over to France to help with their own affairs, with the affair in this case being with Britain. And rather than going to the government in Washington and asking them for help, what Jeanette does is that he goes to ports and rallies up Americans to take ships and go over to Britain and fight them for France. But that doesn't really pan out so well. He gets his support, but the government immediately puts him down. Washington is extremely pissed because that isn't very neutral of America for this baby nation. And it could be very dangerous because if they piss off Britain, who knows what's going to happen? But then again, if they piss off France, who knows what's going to happen? Either way, not going to end completely well, which is why he's pushing this policy of neutrality. So Jeanette is punished, and he's supposed to be sent back to France with no support, but instead he just lives out his days in America, not really doing much for France anymore. But this whole situation is just supposed to showcase an event where the policy of neutrality is shown in motion, where a lot of these specific events are just shown to connect to an idea. So, oh yes, my favorite connection. So, last video, we talked about Shays' Rebellion, which highlighted the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. We talked about how the Articles have no real power, and they're all bark and no bite. Well, under the Constitution, the government now has their own militia and their own power. They have the bite to match their bark, and this is shown in the Whiskey Rebellion. So, again, like I said in last video, Hamilton's National Bank was focused on paying off debts and having a stable economy. In order to do that, taxes had to be set in place. Since the government had new power under the Constitution, they can enforce taxes onto the state, and if states didn't pay it back, there would be repercussions, and there would be a withdrawal of support from the government. So, when people got super upset about the tax on whiskey and they started their own riots and protests, Washington actually came forward with his own militia to put down the rebellion, completely forking off from the direction that Shays' Rebellion took, where there wasn't any militia to really handle the rebellion, and it kind of just died down. But this rebellion and the event that took place and how it was resolved kind of highlight how the Constitution is an apparent upgrade from the Articles of Confederation. Again, having a specific event that matches to an idea. Crap. Washington's farewell address. So, oh, why is that extra dash there? Whatever. But end of Washington's presidency, he has some requests. The two main important ones being to maintain the policy of neutrality that he pushed, and to have no political parties in order to kind of prevent any like political division and any kind of schism within America politically. Because, like I said just now with the Citizen Jeanette affair, we have two different groups, the Federalists and the Anti Federalists, that support different nations, but that in and of itself is going to kind of eventually break the policy of neutrality that Washington is pushing, because whatever party is in power is going to side with whatever superpower they want to side with because they have the power. So that's kind of why Washington is promoting like no more political parties, because all it does is just cause conflict internally and potentially externally. This continuity of neutrality and this focus on at least trying to maintain Washington's wishes with the farewell address is something that persists all the like decades upon decades in America, that is only really broken up until the First World War, World War One, where we do choose our side in an international conflict, deciding to support Britain and France against Germany in World War One. Now we move forward into the presidency of John Adams, who wasn't necessarily an upgrade from George Washington, primarily because part of his presidency is defined by the Quasi-War with France. This war stems from the previous conflict with France, where France and Britain are in their own quarrel, and they go to America to try and get their aid. However, with the Citizen Jeanette affair, America wasn't really willing to give their aid to France, and later on, when France and Britain are both impeding on America's international trade with both superpowers, some Americans are sent to France to kind of discuss how to like quell these tensions and so that America can get its ability to trade overseas again without being like blown up by a French ship or a British ship. The British issue will come later in the next video. But those Americans that were traveling to France met up with some French government officials, and before they even get to discussing a compromise, the French officials demand money before they even begin to talk about a compromise. So just to put this in a simpler way, imagine me and you, the viewer, we're in a fight, and in order to resolve the conflict that we have, I'm like, okay, let's meet up Tuesday at the turf, and then bam, we're both at the turf, and before you even get a word out of your mouth, I'm like, give me $10 and then we can talk. Would you want to give me that $10? Would you not see it as unfair and unjust? That's exactly what John Adams thought. And so what he did, and what a lot of different American publishers did, is that they kind of announced the whole situation as the XYZ affair, where American delegates named X, Y, and Z, named these as to kind of avoid revealing their identities, went to France and were unjustly told and bribed in order to kind of develop a compromise. And that kind of launched off war, this quote unquote quasi war. It's called the quasi war because it's not a real war. And there are no like massive casualties compared to any other war, like war in the past, like the 7 Years' War, the French Indian War, or the American Revolution. The Treaty of Mortefonte, ooh, I did not say that well, but that treaty, uh, that would end the Quasi War in 1800, aka when Thomas Jefferson became president, and the U.S. would gain back its overseas trading freedoms. The other reason that Adams wasn't really seen as an improvement of Washington is because he launched the Alien and Sedition Acts. So let's assess what these acts did first and see why it kind of sucked. So under the Alien Act, citizenship can be made much harder to achieve with immigrants coming into America, and with the Sedition Acts, Adams can persecute anyone who talks bad about the government. So immediately, I think you kind of see why this act kind of sucks, because I can say, oh, the government sucks right now, and then I'd get put in jail. That's kind of taking away our right to free speech, which is embedded in the Constitution. So Adams is kind of going against the Constitution, which isn't really good of a president. A major response to this was the Kentucky and Virginia resolves, which were made to refute the Sedition Act and kind of get mass support to repeal it from the state, like get mass support from the states to repeal it. So, although the resolves weren't really effective and they didn't really result in the end of the act, it was with Jefferson's presidency that these acts would come to an end. Okay, that marks the end of the content of Unit 3, thankfully. But sadly, I have some questions for you all. It's nothing much. It's just 3 questions, with one of them being not super duper hard, but mildly thought provoking. But let's see how it goes. Boom. Okay. So, first thing you always want to do when looking at an MCQ is read the question. That goes for any question in this curriculum. But before you even look at the document, whether it be an image or a text-based document, read the question. Question here is, what is the historical context of this document? Now, on the actual AP, you're going to get a significantly harder question, but I made this for Regents, and I thought here it might just be here to test if you actually know how to match a document to its time period and to its event. So automatically, even if you aren't presented this question directly, know the historical context, know things like historical context, intended audience, purpose, point of view, and outside information towards it. But I'll cover all that in a much later video talking about strategies for writing, because that mainly applies to writing practice, but we're getting sidetracked. Well, I'm getting sidetracked. So let's look at the document first. I'm not gonna give it away in case you don't know it, but this was in last video for a very major event that, if you recall, was very important. So just based off of that event, let's look at the answer choices. Number 1, the states must unite to aid the French during the French Revolution. Number 2, to solve the AIDS epidemic, the states must unite to create a cure. 3, the states must unite to fight Britain in the American Revolution. And 4, the states must unite to fight the French and Native Americans. So, easily, we can cross out B, or 2, because we haven't even talked about the AIDS epidemic, nor did it really exist during this time period. And uniting to something of this urgency, like, like in the document, something that urgent wouldn't really be present for a cure. Different propaganda would be used, not just join or die. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that B is wrong. Let's look at option choice A. The states must unite to aid the French during the French Revolution. So we can cross this out for a couple different reasons. The first reason is that Britain, when they were ruling the colonies, like they made sure that like the colonies didn't have relations with any other international superpowers like France, which is shown in the although economically it is shown in the navigation acts with limitations on trade. And also, like in the event for this document, we are fighting the French, so that immediately crosses that out. Option C, the states must unite to fight Britain in the American Revolution. This, you just got to know the event that connects to this, because this I can't really like tackle just purely off the document, especially since some things hint toward it, like not every colony is present on that snake, like how some colonies were absent from the First Continental Congress with the American Revolution. But you just got to know the event here, which, spoiler alert, it's the French Indian War, which I hope you guys remember. So that leaves one option left, which is option D. So I have a little text excerpt here um for this question. Always read the source after you read the question. So the question is Paine's excerpt. Paine, you know Thomas Paine, so that immediately gives you a hint to what the question, at least what the topic is. Paine's excerpt would be best used to support which movement? So then you go to the source, Thomas Paine, Common Sense, 1776. Wait, you know Thomas Paine because I told you to remember Common Sense. So let's just very hastily skim through this excerpt. Small islands not capable of protecting themselves, proper objects, kingdoms, perpetually governed by an island, in no instance hath nature made the satellite larger than the primary planet. So this goes back to that analogy that I talked about, a satellite controlling the sun. So again, we see the sentiment that Britain should not be controlling the colonial landmass in the colonies, because the small island should not control the big landmass. And as England and America, with respect to each other, reverse the common order of nature. so reverses the common order of nature. That just means to make things logically make sense, where the large controls the small. It is evident they belong to different systems, England to Europe and America to itself. So, what is Paine really saying here? He's saying that each nation, well, in this case, well, America, it's referred to as America here, so we'll say America here. America should be this larger landmass that shouldn't be subservient to the smaller landmass that belongs in a whole different sect of the world. So that's pretty much the sentiment that common sense conveys in general, but this specific excerpt highlights that the most. Paine's excerpt would be best used to support which movement? Let's go through the answer choices. American Revolution, war effort for the War of 1812, Loyalist insurrectionist movements, and the French Revolution. So let's go through this. The American Revolution. Spoiler alert, I made the answer for this one, the first one. So that might not have been the best idea if I want to go through this in order. But let's talk about where the other ones are wrong. War effort for the War of 1812. We Well, if you know your history, you know that there wouldn't really need to be like any cause for Thomas Paine to be like, "Hey, Britain, stop controlling us." If you know the American Revolution happens before 1812, or at least before, well, even just before the 1800s. So, War of 1812 doesn't really click, and there were other reasons for the War of 1812 that I'll discuss in next video. Loyalist insurrectionist movement. So, okay, my Sharpie cap fell. 1 second. Okay, loyalist insurrectionist movements. So, I mean, if you're gonna ask me personally, I would just sway away from this because it's a mouthful, and I would think about those fancy words later. But for this, think about what each word means step by step. Loyalist, people loyal to the British government. Immediately, bam, cross it out. Because loyalists were people subservient to Britain. This whole document is about separating from Britain. Bam. French Revolution. France has nothing to do with this document. Like nothing. Not a mention. And it's primarily just targeting Britain. And yeah, like I think this was one of the easier questions, honestly. I made it very apparent. So yeah. Answer choice to say, obviously. 36. Which of the following most accurately there should be an S there, describes an apparent bias the document's creator had when depicting the event above? So, mouthful. And let's look at the document now. We see this line of assumedly British men, and I'm saying assuming they're British men because look at their apparel. Look at how they're dressed. They're dressed like British troops, and then they're shooting at a whole lot of people on opposing them in what seems to be a city square. So just based off that, think about what event it is. I doubt they'll ever on the AP explicitly tell you the event, but just always take note of the document. If it's a text-based document, see whatever details you can pick up and connect it back to an event or like a war or conflict, anything like that. For a visual document, it should be a bit easier, unless it's like a cartoon, which it may be a little bit harder. But cartoons, it's very extreme if it's apparent or not the event or anything like that. Let's go through the answer. Let's go through the answer choices. Document's creator depicts the colonists as defenseless, when documentation of this event states that protesters had firearms and planned a violent protest. The document's creator displays the redcoats launching an organized assault at the colonists, when in reality the event was in disarray and the redcoats did not have an initial plan on spilling blood or injuring civilians. The document's creator displays the redcoats launching an organized assault at the colonists, when truthfully the ordeal was in disarray, with few redcoats actually carrying firearms. The document's creator shows architecture present in 1770s America, when the event had taken place in France, highlighting an obvious bias and preference towards French architecture. So, what can you cross out? D. Because when it has these absolute words like obvious, then it's wrong. Like if it has like most oftentimes if it has like something 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 always occurred, something 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 was always present, then it's probably wrong, unless really nothing else makes sense. But that's something that should be apparent. So D is off. Um. Okay, let's go through this in order. The document's creator depicts the colonists as defenseless when documentation of the event states that the protesters had firearms and planned a violent protest. I would say this is more so just to knowledge of the event here, which, in tone with the unit and with the time period discussed in answer choice D with the 1770s, you would assume is the Boston Massacre. Because, um, I mean, I'm sure in previous history classes you've seen this image, so it should be familiar at least. And even then, redcoats shooting at colonists, I think just the vocabulary in all of these answer choices gives you a significant hint towards what it is. So, if you know the Boston Massacre, you know that these protesters didn't have firearms at all, and they weren't really planning a violent protest to this measure. They were throwing rocks, and they were in the redcoats' faces. They weren't shooting them. If they were shooting them, it would be a whole different story. So, answer choice A, out. And even if you don't have that line of thinking, it's about finding the one that makes the most sense. So, let's move on to B. Documents creator displays the Redcoats launching an organized assault at the colonists. In reality, the event was in disarray. The Redcoats did not have an initial plan on spilling blood or injuring civilians. Documents creator displays the red. Let's move on to C because they're very similar answer choices. Documents creator displays the Redcoats launching organized assaults at the colonists when truthfully the ordeal was in disarray, with the Redcoats actually carrying firearms. Well, few Redcoats actually carrying firearms. Wow, my bad. Okay, so B or C. If well, if nothing, just take a second to think about it and think about which one makes the most sense. Think about the British and what they would want, their tendencies and their behavior, and think about the colonists and their behaviors. And remember, we're looking for an apparent bias. What the picture of the redcoats would most like support the colonial cause for the American Revolution? Like what would paint the British out as bad? And we can mainly find that in B. But let me say why C is wrong first. So C is wrong because, first of all, why would a British redcoat who's like supposed to be controlling this protest not carry a firearm if things got extreme? And second of all, it is depicted as an organized assault, which it wasn't, which is why B is correct. The event was in disarray, although both of them say that. B says that the redcoats did not have this initial plan on hurting civilians because that's the truth. Because at the peak of tensions, why would the redcoats go out and openly start a fight with these revolting colonists? Why would they just go out and openly shoot them? If you know a bit of detail about the Boston Massacre, you would know that, assumedly, like apparently, like the shot was an accident, and that's what led to all the firing and stuff. But painting out the document so that it looks like the not the colonists, the redcoats are just organizing like they're it's like an execution line. They're just shooting at the colonists like they're gonna execute them. Like painting it out like that makes the British come off in a worse way. When in reality, it probably wasn't even like that. Who knows? I didn't live in 1770s. That's it. Okay. This is the end of Unit 3. This may be a half hour. If it is, I'm sorry. But I will see you all later. Unit 4 is the next video. Will probably also be a half hour. I'll try not to make it a multi-parter, but I'll see you guys later.